Welcome to the History Nerds United podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today we're talking Chasing Shadows from author Greg Skomal and Ret Talbot. Greg's shark expert. You've seen him on Shark Week. Ret is his co-author on this book, kind of talking about his life and sharks. Do I need to say more? It's the summer. We're talking about sharks. I'm just going to shut up and let's get the guys on here so we can talk about it. And here we are with the authors of Chasing Shadows, My Life Tracking the Great White Shark, Dr. Greg Skomal and Ret Talbot. Gents, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
All right, so Greg, I want to start with you. This is your life story. Big question. It's a two-parter. When I get up to Cape Cod this summer, will you take me out to find a shark? Second part, why not?
It's a great question, and it's an excellent answer. I'd love to take you, Brendan, but the truth is I've got a long queue. So I'm happy to slide you into the queue, and it may take a while, but we'll do what we can.
It's the summer. People always cancel at the last second. Just tell me where to be. I'll show up every morning, right? I'll have my sunscreen on. I'll be ready to go.
That's actually the best way to do it. We do get cancellations, and particularly in October. Which is a little, windy, rough, cold, sometimes rainy, and maybe we can slide you on in one of those short notice type scenarios.
Now, when you're telling me about the weather in October, though, maybe I'm going to take a hard pass. Now, the book is about you, but I want to ask Ret, how did you get pulled into this? Because, listen, we're going to talk about all of Greg's accolades and everything that he's done, but you're no stranger to writing and the ocean. How did you get pulled into this?
Well, Greg and I share the same agent, Susan Canavan, who's wonderful. And Susan and I were actually working on a book about the lobster fishery. And when the pandemic hit, we were in the process of getting ready to sell that book. And it was going to require me being on small boats with different people every day for an entire season, which wasn't going to happen post-March 2020. So we canceled that book. And a couple weeks later, Susan called me up and said, I've been wanting Greg to write this book, and he's really busy. Would you guys be willing to have a conversation? And I said, heck yeah.
I see that you just left a little breadcrumb to follow through, and we'll come back to that. There is something I don't understand. And Ret and I were just talking right before we hit record. Obviously, you're both incredibly intelligent men, right? Very accomplished. However, somehow, Greg, you're a Red Sox fan, and Ret is smart enough to be a Yankees fan. You're both New Englanders. How could that possibly happen? Honestly, I don't even need an answer. I just wanted to point it out, really.
Well, I'm even worse than that. I grew up outside New York City, and I was a hardcore Yankee fan most of my childhood. And it wasn't until I moved to Massachusetts and got hazed, harassed, and beaten up a bit that I realized I had to switch. So I'm worse than just a Red Sox fan. I'm a converted one from a Yankee fan, even though I will dabble in Yankees every now and then.
That's not conversion. That's traitorous, Greg. But we're going to move on.
I agree.
So how did this start, Greg, Ret? How did the idea come about? Hey, we're going to write this book? Because, it's part, Greg, your story, but it's also a lot about here's where sharks are, especially around Cape Cod, and what's been happening with them, and now all of the things that are starting to happen as there are a lot more great whites around Cape Cod. So what was the germ of the book, and how did it start to grow?
Well, I'll let Ret follow up, but, it really did start with Susan Canavan, whose family lives on the Cape, and she saw what was going on and the work that I was doing, and she thought it would be a phenomenal story to share with the rest of the world. And to her credit, she kept pinging on me to do it, and I'm spread so thin with the research and the other things I'm doing in my life that I just didn't have the time, and she rightfully made the decision to reach out to Ret to assist. And it was a phenomenal decision and a great partnership that resulted.
So, Ret, the question becomes, how many times did you have to call him a day and say, Greg, you owe me this? What is taking so long? We have deadlines, damn it. How many times?
Greg was phenomenal. I expected that was going to happen a lot. I took it that in the summer, it was going to be a little more difficult to reach him. Well, during shark season, so summer all the way through till October. But no, he was phenomenally accessible, and it was great. And this is sort of my happy place. I'm a science writer, and I enjoy collaborating with scientists to tell these stories to a wider audience. So to have a story that's as compelling, number one, as the resurgence of the white shark population in the Western North Atlantic, and then number two, to have Greg's story, which I didn't know a whole lot of, that you couldn't script it better if you're going to write a movie. I mean, loves sharks from an early age, sees Jaws, wants to be, Matt Hooper, the scientist, does everything he needs to do to position himself to be that scientist and to study white sharks. And boom, there he is in Rhode Island. There are no white sharks. It's New England. And then, a few years later, the rest of the story. And it's just this incredible story from both the trajectory of the shark and the trajectory of Greg.
I just want to add one thing here, get it right out there. Ret did a lot of the heavy lifting here. He really did. I'm a technical science writer. I've written over 100 peer-reviewed research publications that very few people actually read. So Ret, was able to translate that and do the digging and writing that draws an audience. And I can't say enough about his writing style and what he's done.
It was a great collaboration.
Now, what I love about this story, too, is in a lot of especially sciences, right, there's people take themselves very seriously and, pop culture stuff is like, that's whatever, man. Like, I was into it 10 years before anybody heard of it. Jaws is actually a thing for you, right, Greg? Like, this is not a like, oh, yeah, like sharks were cool before you guys even knew anything about it. Jaws is one of those pop culture items that really made somebody like you say, like, this is what I want to do, right?
Yeah. The older I get, the more people I meet in my field and related fields, the more I see people who were also inspired by that movie. It's amazing. As a matter of fact, I once did a documentary called How Jaws Changed the World, and it featured a lot of people like myself who were drawn into the water, whether to film sharks, to photograph them, to study them, you name it. And, it was really inspirational for me. And it became an aspiration, a character in a film. And I never would have believed that.
Now, Ret or Greg, whichever kind of the decision, what's really interesting is at the beginning of each chapter, it's almost like a biography of a shark, where they are, what they're doing, where they're located. Greg, was that kind of your idea? Ret, was that your idea to kind of have this beginning portion where it's kind of the life of a shark? Where are they and what they're doing?
It was really Ret's idea. I would probably have approached it from, let's describe what a shark does, and been very boring in doing so. But what Ret did was he put us in the body of a shark, and he describes how the shark lives from day to day, its special physiology, its attributes, its natural history by being the shark. So it's all Ret on that one.
Ret, where'd you get that idea?
I think when we sat down to write the first chapter, which again, in and of itself, that was the sample chapter we wrote to sell the book. And that chapter just has this sort of really beautiful narrative that's very complete in and of itself and depicts a very important moment in the story of sharks in the Cape and Greg. My sister, when she read the first chapter, she said, oh, it's like the spoonful of sugar with your medicine. She's like, I never would have wanted to learn all this stuff about sharks, but I learned all this stuff about sharks because of those passages. So I think Greg and I looked at it really as an opportunity as the project progressed, as a way to get a lot of, the physiology and the natural history about the animal into the text without necessarily just doing it in a way that was dry. But I think I do, and I don't even know if Greg knows this. I have to give Susan, again, our agent, credit for that, because she saw what I did in the first chapter with the shark, which is Mueller, a shark, and an actual tagged white shark. And she said, I really like that, and I think we should develop that throughout the book. So I don't think many writers or readers will notice this, but if you look closely in the first half of the book, all of the sharks are a male shark, and they are sort of set up to be the same shark as it progresses through its life. And the second half of the book, they're all female sharks, and again, sort of progresses through the course of her life. And at the end, we have the two sharks come together. So there's sort of that little story behind the story, which is it's a love story. It's a shark love story.
I love it.
The shark part of the book, let's be honest, people. Shark Week exists for a reason. Greg, you've been on it. You know this stuff. It's easy to kind of sell sharks even to this day, even though Jaws was decades ago. What I was really drawn into the book was, Greg, your story. It's about perseverance, right? It's about somebody who this is not necessarily an avenue that was open for you. And multiple times in this book, as you're growing up, as you're taking these steps, you do something that a lot of people, would absolutely hate to do, which is you just like, hey, I might not get there, right? And there's somewhere else that I can land, and I'm still, dealing with the ocean, dealing with fish, dealing with these things, but I may not get the time and the place to actually study great white sharks. Did you have just a lot of reminiscences as you're going through this of like, oh man, this could have gone in so many different directions, but here I am?
Yeah, writing the book really forced me to reflect on the various stages of my life and to think about it more, because I kind of just keep moving forward. It's the kind of personality I am. And I tend not to, if I reflect on what happened maybe yesterday. The book forced me to reflect on what happened, 30, 40, 50 years ago and dig deep into my memory and some of the feelings I was experiencing back then. And in hindsight, sure, I probably would have loved to graduate college and start studying white sharks right away, but I think I would have lost something because my career evolved, my skill set evolved. And I think you see that in the book as I experience other things, whether it be studying blue sharks, studying aging growth in blue sharks, studying, as you'll see in the book, Greenland sharks or basking sharks, all the different species I was exposed to. It really gave me an appreciation of what I wanted to do when the white shark holy grail came along, which I never anticipated. I was pretty okay with my career studying those other shark species, making films about them, leveraging those films, as you see in the book, to fund my research. And then when suddenly this gift appeared right in my backyard, it was just like, wow, perseverance pays off.
Ret, what stood out most for you from Greg's life before he finally got to his holy grail, which is the great white shark? Was there anything that kind of stuck out to you or really surprised you about his story up until that point?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are so many things. I think that, well, first of all, just to have the perseverance to make that decision so early in life, post 8th grade, we're talking, right, Greg? And deciding, to get scuba certified, to take the biology classes. And as I like to remind people, there weren't PDFs in those days. Like if you wanted to read scientific papers, you had to go into the basement of the library and dig out the microfiche or the microfilm. And so just that perseverance to sort of go after this course of study was just remarkable to me. And I kind of wish I'd recorded all our interviews and we could do a podcast, because it was such a privilege for me. Greg and I would talk, once during the beginning, we'd speak once a week, and then I kind of write and send stuff to him, and then he'd, send it back to me, and then we talk about it. And that worked really well. But there were times when he would say something that almost in passing, maybe when we had our interview, and then I would do some digging and I'd find this, an article that had been written, and I'd bring that back to Greg, and to see Greg sort of then all of a sudden recollect that and start connecting the dots of his own career. It was just so cool to see. And, to see how somebody, because when it really comes down to it, yeah, Greg's a phenomenal scientist, but from my perspective, even more important, there's lots of phenomenal scientists out there. There's even lots of phenomenal shark scientists out there, but there are not lots of people who have Greg's knowledge base and also are an ambassador for these animals. And that's what's so cool to me, the way he connects with people, whether it's when he's guiding the White Sharks and Whales tour, or whether, he's giving a presentation and, a kid who's just enamored with sharks comes up to him to hear him talk about that and to see that interaction. That's what makes the difference. And that's why, in large part, we can say we sort of are where we are, I think, in terms of shark conservation today, because of people like Greg.
My favorite part is that, Greg, apparently you were very introverted for a while, which was interesting to read in the book, because I'm saying, wait, the Shark Week guy? He's talking with people constantly. He's just, that's what I'm looking at your TED Talk. What are we talking about here? In order for you to be the scientist that you wanted to be, it became a requirement for you, right?
For me, it was important that I get outside my shell. I come from a big family, as you read in the early part of the book, and we were self-contained. If I needed to play baseball, I had 3 brothers to play with, 3 sisters to play with. And I didn't have to seek a lot of outside friends or anything like that. And I became very introverted, and I was as a child. But I wanted to bust out of that, because and Jack Casey, who's featured prominently as a mentor of mine in the book, he wrote the foreword, really helped show me as an example how to do that. Outgoing, interacting with the public, the fishing public, the commercial and recreational fishermen, which you see become a major part of my career. and sharing what we learned about these animals with the public. So I still have awkward moments. I'll tell you that right now. I really do. There are times I know I'm going to walk into a room full of 100 people and have to start talking, and I get a little jittery because inherently I'm still, very closed. And what Ret did was he was able to pry me open to get these stories out. And I think it comes out well in the book. And it's also a lesson to young people who, you don't have to be super outgoing. You don't have to do what I do. You could still study sharks. You don't have to even be a scuba diver. You could still study sharks. You could be very shy and quiet. I busted out of that, but you don't have to. There's lots of opportunities out there. Anybody can be what they want to be.
And Greg, we talked about how hard you had to work and everything like that, but Mother Nature also gave you a huge gift here, right? Because I think the big part is when you took your job on the Cape, you're set up on Martha's Vineyard, I believe. And this is not a place where you're going to see a great white shark until recently, right? So, at the same time, you got to say, hey, Mother Nature, thanks. I worked my butt off, but you made it work out because you lucked out as far as the great white sharks came to find you, really.
You're spot on right. Yeah. Jack Casey said this to me once, I'd rather be lucky than good. I think I'm really lucky, but I think that if people approach life with an open mind and a positive attitude, luck does find its way to you. So there I was on the vineyard, studying a variety of shark species, doing my job, enjoying it, loved island living, which you see in the book. And I'm right there where Jaws was filmed. But knowing deep down, I'd probably never see a live white shark or be able to study one. And then, of course, Gretel came knocking in 2004, that big female white shark that was trapped in the salt pond. And that was kind of a wake-up call. But little did I know that, 5 years later, I'd tag 5 more white sharks and it would explode. And here we are, almost 20 years later, and we've tagged over 300, which is absolutely amazing. So, yeah, it's a gift. It was a gift.
Now, Greg, I have to correct you here. You said Gretel. My understanding was that shark did not have a name. The one that got caught in the salt pond, but something about definitely did not have a name. So I don't know where you got Gretel from.
The white shark who shall not be named, it's a testament to the bureaucracy with which I work with and for. Nobody wanted me to name that shark, and we kept it kind of quiet. It took forever to commit to that. And for years after, I was still not committed to naming fish. I am a classically trained fisheries biologist, and we think of fish as natural resources. But as you see in the book, my attitudes really do shift and evolve and change to now where we name every fish, and we see them every year, and they're like old friends.
Now, Ret, I want to ask you, because I know that you're going to have a lot of input on stuff like this. Like the story with Gretel, for instance. It says it right in there that Greg named Gretel, his bosses got pissed, and he said, no, I didn't. That guy over there is making it up. Nobody's writing that in the book, but you guys have it in there. Ret, I have to feel like there was a conversation around whether or not you keep this in here.
We had some conversations about some things that were in the book, and some things that would stay and some things that wouldn't stay. And Greg's next book is going to have some other great stuff that wasn't revealed yet. You always got to keep something in your back pocket. But for me, so this book is narrative nonfiction. So the idea is that, it's storytelling, and it's interesting. When I would speak to people, I teach writing a lot. I teach science writing a lot. And when I'm speaking to students and I'd be talking about the process of writing this book, I'd sometimes even refer to like Greg as a character, the protagonist. And in my mind, that's sort of the way that I think about this. And there has to be conflict in a story. There has to be a character has to have an arc. And, Greg's was beautiful, but, it was important, I think, to me, and I think to Greg too, that we did get into some places where, we pushed some boundaries sometimes, and we said some things that, that may have been considered controversial at the time. And I feel good about that. I feel like we were very honest, and we told a good story, and I'm pleased with it.
I really appreciated it as a reader. That, first of all, we all deal with bureaucracy. Everybody's got a boss. And there are times, Greg, where that annoyance comes through on the page. And also, I appreciated that neither of you decided to make Greg this perfect hero who does everything right. Especially what stuck out to me is, Greg, you did have a story about trying to tag a great white when you probably shouldn't have been tagging a great white, where you're super smart, you know all of this stuff, and you say it in the book like, I should not have tried this, and this could have gone horribly wrong, and I messed up, and I lost a very expensive piece of equipment. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, and I tell you, I was nervous about putting it in the book because you want to look like a knight in shining armor that makes no mistakes as the central character of a book. But upon reflection at the time, I'm really glad we kept it in and wrote that up because in essence, we had tagged a couple of white sharks off of the harpoon vessel, the Easy Does It, with Captain Bill Shapralis, who was an expert I had been working with at the time. A phenomenal fisherman, and really taught me how to tag and different tagging techniques and how to rig gear. And he was not available. So I went out on another boat with a $4,000 tag. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go give this a shot doing it myself. And I had this half-assed harpoon tagging pole that was rigged up with the tag. And I'm balancing myself on the bow of the boat. And the guy who had volunteered to take me out, he said, there it is. And I looked down and there it was. And I took a shot at it and I missed. I'd like to say I barely missed, but I think I flat out missed. It was a blooper. I threw a brick and the pole went down into the water and hit the bottom and the tag came off. So in essence, I tagged Earth. And there I was looking down at this $4,000 tag, saying, what have I done? How stupid. I realized that the inner voice inside of me that said, don't do this, was right. But it's a good lesson. It was a good lesson for me. I didn't make that mistake again.
What really helps with that story too is you also explain, like, there was a lot of things that could have gone wrong. What sticks out to me about that story too is you were kind of standing somewhere you shouldn't have been standing in the first place, right? And there's all of these things that go wrong because, listen, we have all been there. Hey, boss, I totally got this. And then right after everything gets hosed up, I guess I didn't got that. And the technical pieces that you and Ret kind of put in there, right? Like, I wouldn't say this is a science book. There's a lot of science in here, but I wouldn't call it like a science book. It's this narrative nonfiction. And it's those little pieces that you put in there of this greater story. Hey, I screwed something up, blah, blah, blah. But also those little pieces of, if you're trying to tag a shark, you've got to be here on the boat, and this needs to be this needs to be that. Ret, is that something, especially Greg's going to have all the technical expertise like he talked about, like he can write a paper on this, but you're probably not going to put that out in hard copy. Was that something that you're looking at, like, how do I sneak the science in so I can make people smarter while entertaining them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as a science writer who wrote, I think it is a science book. That is the best compliment you could give us, is to say it doesn't sound like a science book. I would say that two things to that. One is that it was extremely challenging for me to work on this book because my approach is often I like to embed with scientists in the field, and I like to be able to observe and watch and ask questions and just kind of be there. That's what I do. And because this was 2020, and because this, Greg's on state time, and there are all sorts of COVID protocols, and it just wasn't possible for me to be there shadowing him all the time. And so I think I drove him insane. Like the number of photographs of tags he sent me, and I'd be like, I need a different angle, and and technical papers about the tags and photographs, and then describing over and over and over to me, like, do you get it yet, Ret? Like, this is how you do it. But I love that stuff. I think it's what brings a book like this alive. I mean, that's my job as a writer, is to put the reader there so that they can see this for themselves and experience it for themselves.
Something I think a lot of people don't realize is, especially Greg, for your job, there's politics, not the politics that we're thinking about of Democrat versus Republican, but there's a politics of how do we deal with the environment. What was really shocking to me is shark tournaments where, they have evolved where it was a tournament. We want as many sharks as possible, get them out of the water, to something nowadays we wouldn't necessarily look at that as a positive thing. But as part of your job, it really had to be something that you kept an eye on, that you were a part of. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's shocking for somebody reading it right now to say, hey, shark tournaments were a positive thing at one point in time.
It's a great question. And I'm still attacked every now and then because of my support over the years for these fishing events. When I went into Jack Casey's lab at the National Marine Fisheries Service in Rhode Island as a young guy, what I learned very quickly is that these guys were utilizing as many vectors as they could to sample sharks and to learn about them. And one of the more prominent vectors, which we talk about heavily in the book, are shark fishing tournaments, which evolved over the last 50, 60 years. And we talk about the history of those tournaments. And I was conflicted early on, absolutely. I was going to a place with other scientists where we were looking and sampling dead fish. I quickly realized how much we were learning from these animals. And much of what we know about the natural history, the physiology of sharks comes from sampling tissues. And it's really hard to sample some tissues of sharks without killing them. So, the idea being, if you're going to go out to study sharks, do you out and kill a bunch? Or do you take advantage of those specimens which are already being landed and hopefully landed legally, which was the key, And that's exactly what we were doing. So shark tournaments became a very big part of my research and my colleagues' research. I could probably list 1,000 technical papers that have been written based on sharks sampled at tournaments that have produced results that go right into sustainable management policies. So, that information is used for conservation. And so as long as tournaments were operated with a conservation-based premise and legally, we were sampling them. But that's slowly crumbled in terms of just the public's stomach for these kinds of events. And I understand that completely as well. So I'd be hard pressed to find a shark fishing tournament these days. And sir, some of the sampling has stopped because of it. But at the same time, I don't think it's a bad thing. Shark tournaments, many of them turned into circus-like atmospheres, which you read about in the book. And that part of it I didn't necessarily enjoy.
Now, Ret, was this kind of new information, a new part of this story to you when you first looked at it, or was this something that you were aware of? And then how did you think about it as you were working through it?
I'm an angler, primarily a fly angler. I used to be a fly fishing guide out of college. My first writing, a lot of my writing was for the fly fishing magazines. And I was really fascinated in the way that recreational anglers could become part of conservation, and even going beyond conservation of fish species, of different fishes, but actually conservation of the ecosystem as well. And that was a really fascinating concept to me. And as I sort of morphed into a more serious science writer, that's always been something that's been very interesting. I feel like I wish sometimes I was born in the Victorian age in London when science was really in everyone's parlor. Like people were passionate, just regular people were passionate about science, and they were doing experiments in their parlor. They were bringing animals from the ocean and keeping them in these little tanks and studying them and pouring jugs of water back and forth in front of the window to aerate it. And I mean, just amazing stuff. So that's always been a real area of interest for me, how recreational anglers, how the general public can be involved in science and conservation. And then more importantly, that science and scientists create an opportunity to turn that passion, that recreational passion, into data, basically. And that's what Jack Casey did. I mean, that's absolutely phenomenal. And that's what Greg did when he established sort of the mini apex predator program in Martha's Vineyard when he landed there.
Now, Greg, I know a huge question that I think everybody's asking nowadays, especially if you're on Cape Cod, there's more great white sharks. I'm just going to give you this huge softball to you. I'm standing, Nauset Light is behind me, the water is in front of me. Is it safe to go in?
Well, okay, I'm going to preface that with the probability of a shark attack is just tiny, okay? So you've made it to the beach safely, in your car, so you've already defied the odds, relative to shark attack. But now I will be very honest, and that's one thing we're always trying to do with the general public. If you are on the outer Cape, which is what you just described at Nauset Beach, you are dealing with a situation where white sharks are doing what they do naturally. All right. They are feeding on a robust population of gray seals that lives there. So when you go in the water, you're entering, you are throwing yourself in the midst of a predator-prey relationship. The sharks are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And the seals are going to try to avoid being eaten, which I don't blame them. The risk of you being bitten is extremely low. But if you are fearful of that risk, we tell folks, don't go out too far, don't go out too deep. Be cognizant of the fact that there are seals likely in the area that are being fed upon by sharks, which are probably not that far away. Our research has shown that white sharks spend almost 50% of their time when they're on the outer Cape, almost 50% of their time in water less than 15 feet deep. So they're there. And we caution people. We want to educate people about their presence and realize that this natural phenomenon is happening. You may get a chance to see it. You just don't want to be part of it.
Now, Ret, if you're about to go in the ocean, specifically the Atlantic Ocean, are you texting Greg the morning of just to check in, just to see if he's heard anything strange like a super shark? Is that part of your process for going towards the water?
Absolutely. Yes. No, I mean, it's interesting. I used to be a surfer, and I recall when I started to work on this book, I recalled this incident from my 20s or maybe early 30s, when I was out in San Francisco and I was surfing one day at Stinson Beach, and I remember walking by these large billboards that said that a person was attacked by a shark in, less than 10 feet of water, less than X number of feet from shore 2 weeks ago, swim at your own risk. And I remember that not really registering as it didn't concern me. And then as I worked on this book, I've thought about that again and again and again and wondered, should I have been more concerned? And so it definitely I definitely think about things a little differently now. I'm fascinated in the possibility of scientists like Greg collaborating with other scientists using myriad data to be able to create a forecast for risk, almost in the same way that as a surfer, I know there are certain websites that I log surfing to check the surf conditions. I'm fascinated by the idea of being able to have a tool like that for shark risk.
And now I think everyone knows, if you're out there at that part of the country, about the app Sharktivity. Do we highly recommend that around here? Can we trust it? Is that something we should be downloading?
Well, yeah, I think the Sharktivity app is fantastic, but I'm going to caution folks, don't use it for public safety. All right. Use it as an educational tool. Realize it gives you a sense of where sharks are occurring. It's sometimes tagged sharks. It's sometimes sharks that we see from the boat. We report to Sharktivity. The general public reports those sharks, but the general public isn't everywhere all the time, and neither are we. And so just because a beach doesn't have a shark report, and I'm saying this specific to the Outer Cape, which I think is the hot zone, doesn't mean there's not a shark there. So, it's a really neat tool to look at where sharks are turning up and how frequently, but don't use it exclusively as a public safety tool.
Because there's still a lot of unknowns for this entire situation, right? Especially towards the very end of the book. You're on the cutting edge of what do we use for shark safety, right? And some of these things, some of these ideas, they're being tried out now, and we're not sure if it's going to hurt the sharks, if it's going to hurt people, if they're going to work at all. There's still a lot of unknowns as far as dealing with sharks when people are around them, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there was an easy solution, there are locations around the world, we talk about them, like South Africa and Western Australia, places that have had consistent shark bites for decades, California even, that have been dealing with this, low probability event for a very, very long time. And there's no silver bullet. We talk about that in the book, and the towns, are dealing with that. And the towns are hesitant to adopt some strategy that's going to give people a false sense of security. And I agree with that. There may be new technologies coming, or even technologies that are out there now that are effective some of the time, but not all of the time. And so really the best tool is to educate the public about the beauty, the wonder, the magnificence, and presence of these animals, where they're most likely to be. Ret mentioned a forecast map that we're trying to generate now based on water temperature that'll show zones of high probability of white sharks. Those kinds of tools, I think, will be effective. But right now, as far as I'm concerned, there's no, new technology that's going to, solve this issue.
Well, I should be honest with you both. You've done such a great job with this book because I care about it, even though I really don't need to, because I've got this Irish skin. I'm not supposed to be on the beach anyway. So for this interview, I wore my Truro Vineyards shirt.
Nice.
So instead of going to the beach, you can head on over to Truro, Massachusetts, have some wine, and not worry about sharks. But neither here nor there. I know some people love the beach. It's fine. It's fine.
That's wonderful.
Last question for the both of you. Ret, I'm going to let you answer first. There's a lot of people, and listen, I understand that they're wrong, but there's a lot of people who say, like, this is nonfiction, this is science, this is not my thing. There's even a little history in here. I don't read that type of stuff. If I sat one of those people in front of you, as wrong as they are, and they said, why should I read Chasing Shadows? What would you say, Ret?
There are two things for me. One, and this will appeal to a certain audience, this is a remarkable conservation success story. And we don't get to tell conservation success stories of this magnitude very often. And it's happened right under people's noses. Restoring an apex predator to an ecosystem just doesn't happen that often. And so that in and of itself, I think, makes this an incredible story. The other part, I think, is just what we talked about at the beginning. Greg's story and the way it coincides with the arc of white sharks in the Western North Atlantic, it's a compelling story. It's got everything you could want from a story. You know, a kid who has dreams, who has to struggle to achieve those dreams, who has some setbacks, who, perseveres, finds himself in the right place at the right time, gets what he wished for, and finds that, wow, this is really maybe a whole lot more complex than Matt Hooper had it.
All right, Greg, same question. I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people hear the word history and they think of their high school, history class. And no offense to those teachers, but I remember mine, and I don't want to go back to it. And sci-fi is the big thing now. But, my life has been, exciting. And what Ret and I have done is, I think we share the story of adventure and success and perseverance and chasing a dream. And I think we've done an effective job at talking about those aspects of it. And of course, who doesn't like sharks, right? But instead of a big mechanical shark that eats 100 people or giant megalodon sharks that jump out of the water, this is a true story, and hopefully we impart the wisdom that we've learned about the reality of sharks, and we dispel some of the myths. And even with those myths dispelled, these are really cool animals that we're just starting to scratch the surface on. So I hope that inspires folks to pick up the book and read it.
Ret, Greg, the book's fantastic. If this isn't a beach read, I don't know what is. Thank you both so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
And that's it for this episode. Thank you so much, Greg and Ret, for coming on. Had a wonderful time. Go out and get it. Perfect summer read, Chasing Shadows. In the meantime, nerds, hit us up Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're on there putting out history goodies all week, so check us out. Please listen to the podcast, tell all your friends about it, and if you can give us a rating on whatever you listen to us on, please make it 5 stars. Until next time, stay cool, nerds.